The video we're going to do today is part 2 of basic knitting. This one is going to be on the purl stitch. If you do purl stitch every single row, it'll come out the same as it did when you knit every single row. It's pretty much the same as a garter stitch. But if you add the purl stitch with the garter stitch, you get what's called the stockinette stitch, where when you knit on this side, it's smooth, and when you purl back, which is normally the way it's done, but not all the time, you would get the bumps. So this is what we're going to do today. We'll refresh ourselves on the cast on stitch. We do the long tail cast on. I usually do about a foot of yarn per 10 stitches, and if I want to cast on 20 stitches, I use about 2 feet. We're only going to cast on about 10-11 stitches, so we'll go about a foot. With the tail end, not the ball end. You want the ball end of yarn. We're not going to use at this point, so we just set it aside. So you have your long tails off to your right. You lay your yarn in the palm of your hand with the tail facing up. Loop it over. So now your tail yarn is over top your ball yarn. Once you loop it over, then you bring your tail yarn under your loop. And now you got a line through the middle of your loop. And this is where we're going to pick up the yarn to start our stitches. This is called a slip stitch. We just finished a slip stitch. Now it's loose, so you got to decide which tail you want to pull. If you pull this tail, it loosens it more. So then we want to use this tail, which would tighten it. But you don't want to tighten it so tight that it doesn't slide easily off your needle. We move it out a little bit more. You would hold your ball yarn in your right hand, and you would use your tail yarn to do your yarn overs with. And you would run the needle up your thumb, so whatever direction your thumb is going, that's the direction your needle is going to go when you do this particular type of cast on. So hold the yarn in your left hand, clockwise over your thumb, so it forms an X. If you do it counterclockwise by mistake, you don't have the X, so it's a good way to know you're in the right direction. So clockwise around your thumb, you go up your thumb, hold it in your left hand, take your yarn, your tail yarn, counterclockwise over your needle, hold it down along the edge of your needle. The thumb yarn goes over the tip and it pulls tight. And there's your stitch number 2. Now let's do the next one. Clockwise over the thumb, up the thumb, hold in the left hand, yarn over counterclockwise with your tail, hold it along the edge of your needle, thumb yarn over and pull. Clockwise, up the thumb, hold, counterclockwise, hold on the needle, flip the thumb yarn over, and pull. And this is how you do your long tail cast on. So we're just going to do, I guess, maybe 10 stitches. There's 5, 6, 7, I'm running out of yarn, 8, well, it looks like I'm just going to have 8 stitches, but you can do 10 or however many you want to do. Now, after you've practiced your knitting, you knit stitch until you're really comfortable with your knit, then you can go on to your purl. We did the knit the other day, and you want to keep doing it until knitting becomes second nature. You don't even think about it, you just automatically do it. Now, when we did the knit stitch, we scooped our ice cream by going in and coming around and coming back out this way. So we went in the front loop and come around like this. And it's similar for the purl stitch, but we're going to do it the opposite direction. So instead of going this way and here, we're going to go this way and out. So we're still using the front loop. So we go through the front loop and zip back out the same way. And when we come back out, that's when we're going to grab the yarn and pull it through. This is kind of a tight little one, but we'll make it work. And your purl yarn is always in front of your work. I'm going to use a different color so you can actually see how it works. So you go from back to front, yarn over counterclockwise, tip it back through, and then slide it off your needle. There's your first purl stitch. I think I'm about to lose my stitch. There, okay. Let's do another one. From back to front, yarn over, hold the yarn along your needle for a little bit of tension, tip it back under, and pull it through. I'll see if I can tip the needle so you can see what it's looking like from the other side. Wrap the yarn around it, tip it back through. See how it comes through? You don't want to take it and try to go underneath this way because it's not going to work. You want to make sure it's through the loop itself. Let's try another one. Back to front, yarn over, tip it back through, and pull. Back to front, yarn over, tip it back through, and pull it out. Back to front, yarn over, tip it back through, and then the yarn off your left needle. We'll do it again. We'll do it all the way to the end. And as long as you work on the tips of your needles, a lot of times the yarn will behave itself and follow through and keep in the tension. That's really important. If you don't keep this tension, when you go to pull it through, instead of pulling it through, as you see, it falls off. It can't hold itself. You've got to hold on to it as you tip it back through. Now this time when you turn your work to do your next row of purl stitches, you'll notice that the yarn is behind your work. It goes from the front to the back. When we knitted, it went from the back to the front. So you don't want to pull it tight. You want to make sure that stitch stays down just like it did when it was on the front side, but now it's on the back side. Okay, let's do the next set of purls. The yarn is still in the front. Back to front. Hold it with your left hand. Yarn over. Tension on your yarn. Tip it back through. Back to front. Yarn over counterclockwise. Tip the needle back through and pull it off the left needle. Back to front. And you just keep practicing this over and over again. You can do 10 rows, 20 rows, however many rows you want to do until you feel really comfortable doing the purl stitch. Because once we start putting the purl stitches with the knit stitches, it's so easy to get a little bit confused on which side of your work this yarn is supposed to be on. But always remember, when you're purling, the yarn is in front of your work. When you're knitting, the yarn is behind your work. I lost a stitch right there because this came loose, but this is practice, so it doesn't matter if we lose a stitch here or there. So now I've got 9 instead of 10, or however many I got. But if you keep doing the purl stitch on every single roll, it's going to look like the garter stitch like we have here, because that's what happened here. We want to do 2 or 3 rows, maybe 4 rows of nothing but purl. Nothing but purl. You want to purl until this is just so easy to do. You don't really think too much about which side the yarn is on and which side you poke the needle through. And practice. The more you practice, the better it is, the easier it gets. You'll notice after maybe 2 days or 3 days of practicing, all of a sudden things start getting easier and things start going together smoother, and you will be able to do it more comfortably. But give yourself time. It's like learning to ride a bicycle. First time you get on a bicycle, you don't necessarily stay up. With knitting, the first time you try to knit, you don't necessarily get the needle in the right place or the yarn wrapped around it, so it stays with the tension. Or it might feel like you're knitting with 2 logs instead of knitting needles, or it just feels so uncomfortable that it just feels weird. But don't worry about it. Just keep doing it and keep doing it and keep doing it. Before too long, you'll be comfortable. As you can see, since I purled every single row, it's the exact same as knitting every row, and I've got my ridges. This time now we're going to put knit with purl. So this row now, instead of purling this row, we're going to knit this row. And this is what's going to cause this stockinette section to start forming. So remember how we knitted? We went through the front loop, the yarn's in the back, yarn over, hold the yarn along the needle, and tip it back through. And let's do another one. front to back instead of back to front, yarn over, flip it through. Front to back, yarn over, tip it back through. Front to back, yarn over, tip it back through. And we want to do this all the way across your row. Yarn over, tip it back through. And you just keep doing this till you get to the end of your row, because we're not going to switch up and do knits and purls in the same row. That will be another class. Okay, so now as you see, instead of a roll of bumps, we got all smooth. So we're starting to get the appearance of a stockinette. Let's turn our work. Now this side has got the bumps on it, so this is the side we're going to purl. So that's the way it's easier. If you got bumps, you're going to purl. If you don't have bumps, you're going to knit. So now we're going to put the needle behind the yarn and go back to front. Yarn over and tip it back through. Back to front, yarn over, tip it back through, because now we're purling and the yarn is in front. Yarn over. And we're going to do this all the way across the roll. I just dropped the stitch. We'll put it back on. We'll talk about drop stitches and picking up stitches in a later class. And just keep doing this all the way across. Okay, now let's look at the front side again. You can see how the front side is very smooth here. And when you look at the back side, it's all bumpy. Same with this. The front side is real smooth and the back is bumpy. These are the two stitches you would use to make a sweater in a stockinette fashion, which most sweaters are done in, with added features like eyelets or cables or ribbing or whatever type of design pattern that the author has put into their work. So you just keep doing this until you got the length you want. After you have the length you want, then you're going to have to bind off. So here's one I've got a little more work done. You can see this is where I purled every row and I got bumps all the way across, and here's where I knitted and purled. To bind off, you would bind off, since I'm on the front side and this is the knit side, I would bind off in knit. If this was the finished side, I would bind off in purl. Or you can bind off in knit. A lot of times you sew that into the seam and it doesn't really show, so whichever you're the most comfortable with, that's how you bind off. So binding off, you knit 2 stitches. So there's 1, 2. Now we're going to take the first stitch, pick it up, take it over the second stitch and off the tip of the needle. Get this out of the way. So pick up the first stitch. Now keep tension on this here. You don't want to lose your tension on that. If you lose tension on that, both loops will fall off. You take the first one over the second one and off the needle. And there's your first bind off. Now we need 2 stitches again, so we're going to knit the next stitch. So now we have 2. Pick up the first stitch, take it over the second stitch, and off the needle. We're going to do this all the way across. Now some people have trouble picking up the stitches with the needle. Now you notice, even though this is right-handed knitting, your left hand is doing the work, your right hand is just holding stationary. So there's many times that your left hand is doing the work, many times the right hand is doing the work. That's why I say it's a good idea to learn right-handed, because you're going to use both hands in different ways. So both hands have to learn how to do something. Now if you can't get it off using the needle, you can use your finger. Pick up the first one with your finger, take it over the second one, and take it off. That'll work just as easily. So you can do it that way until you and the needle become more friendly with each other. But it will come. Just give yourself time. But this is how you'd bind off. Almost every piece of work is bound off this way. There is a couple of additional bind off ways, but when a pattern tells you to bind off in a different fashion, it will walk you through how to bind off. Now the next class I'm going to start showing you what the abbreviations are, so when you see an abbreviation, you will be able to understand what you're looking at. I just figured for these first two, it was more important to learn how to cast on, knit, purl, and bind off. Now, after you get this last one done, you can tear everything apart and practice it again, or make a whole new piece, or keep going and make this big, long, wide piece, and you have made yourself a scarf.